You're the only real thing right now.
I'm not going anywhere, Mr. Maxwell. I'm here.
Who are you? The voice came out trembling, almost childlike, completely different from the authoritative tone that used to echo through the halls of Maxwell Industries. Alexander Maxwell, CEO of one of the world's largest technology corporations, sat on a hospital bed, his eyes wide with fear, staring at the nurse who had just entered the room with a tray of medication. The woman stopped at the door, surprised by the question. "Mr. Maxwell, I'm Nurse Clara. I've been taking care of you for 3 days. Don't you remember?" Alexander passed a hand over his face, feeling the bandages on his forehead, his entire body aching. 3 days? I don't remember anything. I don't remember my name. I don't remember where I am. I don't remember you. Who am I? Clara felt a tightness in her chest. The car accident had been terrible. The head-on collision with a truck on the highway had left the 42-year-old businessman in a coma for 2 days. The doctors had warned of possible neurological after-effects, but no one expected such profound amnesia. Your name is Alexander Maxwell. You are a very important businessman. You had a serious accident 3 days ago. The doctors say your memory might return with time. Alexander looked at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. Businessman? Important? He felt none of that. There were no memories of meetings, of deals, of achievements. Just a frightening void where an entire life should be. And you? Why are you here? Clara approached slowly, placing the tray on the bedside table. I'm your nurse. I'm here to take care of you until you recover. She had a kind face, brown eyes that conveyed a genuine calm. Alexander clung to her presence like a drowning man to a piece of wood. Don't go, please. You're the only real thing in this moment. Clara smiled tenderly. I'm not going anywhere, Mr. Maxwell. I'm here. In the following days, Alexander discovered fragments of a life he didn't recognize. Executives in expensive suits appeared, lawyers with leather briefcases, a secretary who spoke of multi-million-dollar contracts. They all treated him with a deference that made him uncomfortable. They talked about numbers, stocks, mergers, and acquisitions, but none of it made sense to him. The only person who treated him like a human being was Clara. She would enter the room at 6 in the morning with a sincere smile, ask how he had slept, tell him funny stories about other patients in the hospital while checking his vital signs. Clara worked at 2 different hospitals, pulling double shifts almost every day to pay the rent on a tiny apartment in a poor area of the city, and still help her sick mother who lived upstate. But Alexander knew none of this. To him, Clara was simply the person who made his days bearable. One afternoon, as Clara was changing his medication IV, Alexander asked an unexpected question. Are you married? Clara laughed, a little surprised. No, Mr. Maxwell. I don't have time for relationships. I work 14 hours a day. Why do you work so much? I need the money. My mother is sick, and the public hospitals can't provide the treatment she needs. I'm saving up to pay for a private specialist. Alexander was silent for a moment. How much do you need? Clara stopped what she was doing and faced him. Why do you ask? I want to help. I don't know who I was before this accident, but I know I have money. They said I'm rich. I can pay for your mother's treatment. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head firmly. I can't accept that, Mr. Maxwell. It would be wrong. Why? If I have it and you need it, why would it be wrong? Because you don't really know me. Because when your memory returns, you'll regret this generosity. Alexander leaned forward, taking her hand. Maybe when my memory returns, I'll become a worse person. Let me do this now, while I'm still able, to see what really matters. 3 weeks later, Clara arrived at the hospital, her eyes red from crying. They weren't tears of sadness, but of uncontrollable joy. Alexander was sitting in the armchair near the window, reading a book of poetry she had lent him, and he immediately noticed something had happened. What is it? My mother. The test results came in today. The treatment is working. The tumor has shrunk by 40%. The doctors said she has a real chance of recovery. Now, Alexander felt a wave of happiness that was completely new to him. It wasn't the cold satisfaction of closing a lucrative deal. It was something warm, human, profound. So it worked. It worked. Clara approached him, tears streaming freely down her face. How can I thank you? You saved her life. You don't need to thank me. You saved mine first. Clara didn't understand what he meant, but Alexander knew. In those weeks of emptiness and fear, Clara had been his anchor, his only connection to something real and true in a world that seemed artificial and distant. He was falling in love with her, though he didn't know if he had the right to feel that. Doctors cleared Alexander for discharge after 5 weeks. His memory was still lost. Only vague fragments returned occasionally, images without context, faces without names. The neurologist said he might recover everything suddenly, or never remember at all. There were no guarantees. On the morning of his discharge, Clara entered the room for the last vitals check. There was a sadness in her eyes she tried to hide. So, today's the day, she said, forcing a smile. You're finally going home. Alexander looked out the window, watching a uniformed chauffeur pull a black limousine up to the hospital entrance. That didn't look like home. It just looked like another strange place full of people who knew him, but whom he didn't recognize. I don't want to go, he said simply. Mr. Maxwell, you need to get back to your life. But what if this isn't the life I want? Alexander turned to her, and there was something desperate in his eyes. In these 5 weeks, the only thing that has made sense to me is you. Your stories, your smiles, the way you genuinely care about people. I don't want to go back to a world where everything is a transaction, where even human relationships have a price. Clara took a step back, her emotions swirling. Mr. Maxwell, please, don't say that. You're confused because of the amnesia. When your memory returns, you'll realize this isn't real. He stood up, moving closer to her. And what if it's the other way around? What if this version of me is more real than the one I lost? Clara wanted to answer, but the door burst open. A tall man in a gray suit entered, followed by 2 lawyers. Richard Stanton, vice president of Maxwell Industries, had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Alexander, it's great to see you ready to get back to work. We have a mountain of decisions awaiting your approval. Alexander looked at the man with suspicion. I don't remember you. Richard laughed, but there was tension in the sound. Yes, we heard about the amnesia. Very inconvenient. But the doctor said you're fit to resume activities. We've prepared all the documents you need to sign to keep operations running. What kind of documents? Just temporary transfers of authority. Some contracts that were in negotiation before the accident. Nothing too complicated. Alexander flipped through the papers Richard had placed on the table. Even without his memory, something about it didn't feel right. Why the rush? Richard took a deep breath, trying to maintain his patience. Because every day you're incapacitated, the company loses millions. The shareholders are nervous. Competitors are sensing weakness. We need to show that Maxwell Industries is still strong. Clara, who had been standing silently, felt a chill. There was something predatory in the way Richard looked at the documents, like a vulture circling wounded prey. Mr. Maxwell, she said softly, maybe you should consult your own lawyers before signing anything. Richard shot her a glare. Nurse, this is none of your business. These are corporate matters you're not equipped to understand. Alexander stepped between Clara and Richard. She has a better capacity to understand what's right and wrong than many people I've met these past weeks. I'm not signing anything until my head is clear. Richard's smile vanished. You don't have a choice, Alexander. The company needs leadership. If you can't provide it, the board will have to take action. Is that a threat? It's reality. Think about it over the weekend. We have an extraordinary board meeting on Monday. I hope you've made the right decision by then. Richard left, slamming the door and leaving a heavy silence. Alexander turned to Clara. He's lying, isn't he? About what? About everything. Clara hesitated. I don't know, Mr. Maxwell, but trust your instincts. Even without your memory, you still know who you want to be. Alexander went to the mansion that was supposedly his home, a 32,000-square-foot property with elaborate gardens, an infinity pool, and a staff of employees who treated him like royalty. Everything was perfect, cold, and soulless. He spent the weekend searching the house for clues about who he had been. He found photos of himself at galas, always alone or with different women who never appeared in more than one picture. He found awards from business magazines naming him one of the most ruthless CEOs on the market. He found a safe full of contracts that showed a clear pattern. Alexander Maxwell had built his empire by acquiring smaller companies, laying off employees en masse, and reselling the assets for a profit. He was, or had been, exactly the kind of person he now despised. On Sunday night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He sat in the mansion's immense library, surrounded by expensive books he had probably never read, thinking about Clara, about how she worked 14 hours a day without complaint, how she genuinely cared for each patient, how her eyes lit up when she talked about her mother. She represented everything he hadn't been: kindness, purpose, real human connection. At 2 a.m, his cell phone rang. It was a number from the hospital. Alexander? Clara's. Voice was trembling, frightened. Clara? What's wrong? I need your help. It's my mother. The hospital said the payment for her treatment was canceled. They said the transfer was reversed. The doctors are going to stop her chemotherapy if we can't get the money by tomorrow. What? That's impossible. I paid it personally. I know, but the bank said the transaction was disputed. They said someone from your company claimed you weren't in a mental state to authorize such large transfers. Alexander felt rage explode inside him. Richard, that son of a bitch, used my amnesia to reverse the payment. Stay calm, Clara. I'll fix this right now. You can't. The banks are closed until Monday. My mother doesn't have until Monday. If they stop the treatment now, the tumor will start growing again. Then I'll find another way. Trust me. Alexander hung up and started calling every number in his phone marked as important. Directors, lawyers, board members. Most didn't answer in the middle of the night. Those who did said they couldn't do anything without formal authorization, that he had to wait for the Monday meeting, that procedures had to be followed. For the first time since the accident, Alexander felt the complete impotence of not having his memory. All the connections, all the influence, all the power he supposedly had were useless because he didn't know how to activate them. Then an idea struck him. Risky, possibly illegal, but it was the only option. He went into the mansion's home office and turned on the computer. The system asked for a password, but there was a sticky note attached to the monitor with a sequence of numbers. Typical of someone so arrogant, they didn't believe they could be hacked in their own home. Alexander accessed the Maxwell Industries systems. It took him 3 hours, but he traced the payment reversal order. As he suspected, it came directly from Richard Stanton, authorized with the YED emergency codes that allowed the VP to make financial decisions in case of the CEO's incapacitation. But there was more, much more. Alexander discovered an entire network of suspicious transactions. Richard had been diverting company funds to offshore accounts for at least 2 years. Small amounts that went unnoticed individually, but totaled tens of millions of dollars. And there were messages, emails between Richard and specific board members planning to use Alexander's amnesia to take permanent control of the company. The accident had been the perfect opportunity. Alexander printed everything, made backups on 3 different flash drives, and then did something the old Alexander probably never would have done. He called the FBI. I want to report a large-scale corporate fraud scheme, he said when they answered, and I need it to be treated as an emergency because a life is on the line. Monday morning, Alexander walked into the Maxwell Industries boardroom, with Clara by his side. He had insisted she come. He needed at least one genuine person in that room. Richard was sitting at the head of the table, already assuming the position of power. He smiled when he saw Alexander enter. Glad you decided to show up, Alexander. I hope you've thought about our conversation. I've thought a lot, Alexander said, placing a folder on the table. In fact, I spent the whole weekend thinking about who I was, about who I want to be, and about who you really are, Richard. Richard's smile faltered. What are you talking about? I'm talking about fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to illegally seize control of a company. I'm talking about 2 years of systematic theft that you thought you could keep hiding by taking advantage of my amnesia. Alexander opened the folder, spreading the printed documents across the table. The board members leaned forward, their faces turning pale as they recognized what they were seeing. This is ridiculous! Richard stood up abruptly. You're confused. Your amnesia is making you see things that aren't there. The federal agents waiting downstairs don't think it's confusion, Alexander said calmly. I'm sure they'd love to hear your version of the story. The door opened, and 2 agents in formal suits entered the room. Richard Stanton, we need you to come with us to answer some questions regarding accusations of corporate fraud and money laundering. Richard looked around, the room like a cornered animal. You can't do this. I built this company just as much as he did. Alexander was incapacitated. I had the right to protect our interests. You had the right to steal millions? Alexander shook his head. No, Richard. You had an obligation to keep the company running honestly. But you decided my amnesia was the perfect excuse for a coup. As the agents handcuffed Richard and escorted him out, Alexander turned to the other board members. Some looked shocked, others guilty. I know some of you were involved. The investigations will show exactly who. But right now, we have more urgent matters. First, I want the finance department to immediately reverse the cancellation of the medical treatment payment I authorized 3 weeks ago. Second, I want a full audit of all transactions from the last 3 years. Third, summon the heads of human resources. We need to discuss our policy on mass layoffs. One of the board members, an older woman named Margaret, spoke cautiously. Mr. Maxwell, not to question your authority, but you are still recovering from amnesia. Are you sure you're ready to make such drastic decisions? Alexander looked at Clara, who was sitting quietly in a corner of the room, her eyes shining with pride. I'm more certain now than I imagine I ever was before the accident, because now I'm making decisions based on what's right, not just what's profitable. Margaret nodded slowly. Then, perhaps, the amnesia was a blessing, Mr. Maxwell. Perhaps it was, he agreed. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We now continue with the story. 6 months later, Maxwell Industries was an unrecognizable company. Alexander had implemented radical changes, minimum salaries significantly above market for all employees, healthcare programs extended to families, flexible work policies that prioritized work-life balance. The shareholders were skeptical at first, predicting a drop in profits. But something surprising happened. Productivity skyrocketed, employee turnover dropped to almost zero, and the company's reputation improved so much that new clients came specifically because they wanted to work with a corporation that demonstrated real values. The business magazines that once called him ruthless now interviewed him as an example of ethical leadership. None of them knew the transformation had begun in a hospital bed, with a kind nurse, who had taught him there were more important things than profit. Alexander had recovered fragments of memory over the months, enough to understand who he had been, enough to be deeply ashamed of that man. But he never recovered the ability to be that person again. It was as if the accident had broken not just his memory, but the brain circuits that allowed him to be cold and calculating. One Friday afternoon, Alexander left the office early, something he had never done in his old life. He drove to a small apartment in a modest neighborhood and rang the bell. Clara opened the door, wearing an apron dusted with flour, a smudge of chocolate on her face. She was surprised to see him. Alexander? What are you doing here? He smiled, holding up a bag. I brought wine. I heard you finally have a day off from the hospital today. Can I come in? Clara stepped aside to let him pass, suddenly conscious of the apartment's modesty compared to his mansion. Sorry about the mess. I was trying to bake a cake for my mom's birthday tomorrow. It's perfect, Alexander said sincerely. And he meant it. The small apartment with its peeling paint, old but well cared for furniture, and the smell of baking cake felt more alive than any room in his mansion. How is your mother? Clara smiled, and it was the most beautiful smile he had ever seen. The doctors said she's in complete remission. No sign of the tumor. They're releasing her from intensive treatment next month. Alexander felt the familiar tightness in his chest, that genuine joy he only felt when it came to Clara and her family. That's wonderful. You must be so relieved. I am. Thanks to you. He waved her thanks away, uncomfortable. You've already thanked me 1,000 times. You don't need to anymore. And I'll never stop thanking you. You saved my mother, Alexander. You saved my life, too, in a way. And you saved mine, in the way that matters, he replied softly. There was a loaded silence between them, full of unsaid things. In the 6 months since his discharge, Alexander had kept in touch with Clara. Occasional coffee meetings, texts asking how she was. But he had always maintained a respectful distance, aware of the gigantic difference between their worlds. Clara was the one who finally broke the silence. Why are you really here, Alexander? He took a deep breath. Because I'm tired of pretending I can stop thinking about you. Because every decision I make. Now, I wonder what you would think. Because when something good happens, you're the first person I want to tell. Because I've been in love with you for 6 months, and I can't hide it anymore. Clara froze, her eyes wide. Alexander, you're my boss. Indirectly. You're a billionaire. I'm a nurse. Our worlds are completely different. They were different, he corrected. But I'm not the man I was. You saw that. You helped me become who I am now. And if our worlds are different, then we'll build a new one together. One where what matters isn't money or status. But this, he pointed to his heart. Real connection. Clara felt tears begin to fall. She was terrified and hopeful at the same time. Are you sure? Your memory could come back completely one day? You might remember who you were and realize this was all a mistake. Then I'll be lucky to have known the better version of myself before losing him again, he said, moving closer. But I don't think that will happen. I think the accident didn't take my memory. It gave me clarity. It forced me to see the world without the filters of cynicism and greed I had built up. It let me see you. Alexander, Clara whispered, but she couldn't continue because he gently pulled her in for a kiss. It was soft, hesitant at first, and then deeper, more certain. When they separated, Clara was smiling through her tears. The oven timer went off, making them both laugh. The cake! Clara rushed to the kitchen, pulling out a perfectly baked chocolate cake. When she turned around, Alexander was standing behind her, his eyes shining with what she now recognized as real love. Come with me tomorrow, he said, to visit your mother. I want to meet her properly, not as the man who paid for her treatment, but as the man who loves her daughter. You want to meet my mother? As my boyfriend? If you'll have me in that role? Clara couldn't respond with words, so she just nodded, hugging him tightly. As the smell of chocolate filled the small apartment, which suddenly felt like the most perfect place in the world. 3 years later, Alexander stood at the entrance of a new building, inaugurating the first of many community medical centers for the Maxwell Santos Foundation. Santos was Clara's last name, now his as well. They had married a year after that kiss in the kitchen, in a simple ceremony with only close family and a few friends. Clara's mother had given them the rings, crying with joy to see her daughter so happy. The medical center would offer free or low-cost treatment to low-income communities, focusing especially on oncology and long-term care. It was funded by the profits of Maxwell Industries, which, curiously, had only increased since Alexander implemented his human-centric policies. Clara stood by his side, no longer as a nurse but as the foundation's medical director. She had gone back to school, completed a specialization in hospital administration, and discovered a natural talent for organizing efficient and compassionate healthcare systems. As Alexander cut the inaugural ribbon, a woman approached them timidly. She was in her 30s, in simple but clean clothes, and clearly nervous. "Excuse me, Mr. Maxwell? Mrs. Maxwell? Can I speak with you for a moment?" Clara smiled warmly. "Of course. How can we help?" The woman took a deep breath. "My name is Maria. I'm on the cleaning staff at your company's headquarters. I've worked there for 5 years. I came to thank you for everything you've done." "There's no need to thank us," Alexander said. "You work hard. You deserve to be treated with dignity." "It's not just that," Maria continued, her eyes starting to fill with tears. My son has leukemia. He was diagnosed 6 months ago. I thought we were going to lose everything trying to pay for his treatment. But the company's healthcare program covered everything. Everything. And more than that, you gave me paid time off to stay with him in the hospital. The doctors say he's responding well to treatment. He's going to recover. Alexander felt the emotion tighten his throat. He looked at Clara and saw she was also fighting back tears. "How old is your son?" Clara asked gently. 7. His name is Miguel. He made a drawing for you. Maria pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her bag. It was a child's drawing of a superhero with a large M on his chest, holding the hand of a, small child. Underneath, in crooked lettering, it said, "Thank you for saving my life." Alexander took the drawing with trembling hands. It wasn't what he had done this time, but it was because of what Clara had done for him 3 years ago. The cycle was continuing. "Can we meet Miguel?" he asked. Maria smiled, tears now falling freely. "He would love that. He's on the 4th floor, getting chemotherapy right now. Can I take you to him?" When they entered the hospital room, a thin boy, with large eyes, smiled at the sight of his mother. He wore a colorful beanie covering his bald head and was hooked up to a chemo V, but his eyes shined with life. "Mom, you're back, and you brought visitors." "Miguel, these are Mr. and Mrs. Maxwell," Maria said. The boy's eyes went wide. "You made this hospital?" Alexander knelt by the bed. "We helped build it. But people like your mom, who work hard every day, are the ones who really make everything work. My mom said you're the reason I can get treatment here. She said the medicine used to be too expensive." Alexander looked at Clara, who was holding his hand tightly. "We just did what was right, Miguel. Every child deserves a chance to get well. When I grow up," Miguel said with determination, "I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to help other kids like you helped me." Clara knelt too beside Alexander. "You know, Miguel, when I was a nurse, I met a man who was very sick and confused. I took care of him, and he got better. But you know what happened? He taught me more than I taught him. Sometimes, the people we help end up helping us too. It's a cycle. And now, you're going to continue that cycle." Miguel nodded seriously, as if receiving an important mission. "I will. I promise." When they left the hospital an hour later, after talking with Miguel about his favorite superheroes and promising to visit again, Alexander and Clara stood in the parking lot, looking at the building. "What's it like to be back?" Alexander asked. "Back? In a hospital? Where it all started for us." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "It feels like coming full circle. You were lost. I helped you find yourself. Now we're helping other people find themselves too." Alexander hugged her tighter. "You know what's funny? Sometimes I wake up in the morning and for a moment, I don't remember the accident. I don't remember losing my memory. And then I see you next to me and I think, this is the only memory that matters. Everything else is just context." Clara turned to face him. "Your memory never fully came back, did it? Some fragments, vague faces, feelings of déjà vu. But the person I was, that Alexander is dead. He died in that accident. And I'm grateful for it every day. Because if he had survived, I never would have really known you. I never would have learned to love. And do you regret it? Losing that power, that influence, that version of success. Everyone envied." Alexander laughed. "Are you kidding? Look at what I got instead. A wife who makes me want to be better every day. A purpose that goes beyond numbers in a bank account. The ability to sleep at night knowing our decisions save lives instead of destroying them. I traded a cold empire for a kingdom of meaning. It was the best deal of my life." They stood there for a few more minutes, just appreciating the moment. Then Clara spoke softly. "I have some news for you." Alexander pulled back to see her better, noticing something different in her smile. "What news?" "I went to the doctor yesterday. That routine checkup you made me promise I wouldn't cancel. And it turns out I'm not going to be able to work as much in the coming months. I'll need to slow down." Alexander's heart stopped. "Are you sick? Is everything okay?" "I'm perfect," she laughed. "But I'll need extra care because we're expecting a baby." The world stopped. Alexander stood completely still, processing her words. A baby? Our daughter, Clara said, her hand instinctively going to her still flat stomach. Or son. We found out it's a girl, but I didn't want to spoil the surprise. Alexander felt the tears start to fall. Something the old Alexander would probably have considered weakness. Now, it was just pure, uncontrollable love. We're going to have a daughter? Clara nodded, crying now too. We're going to have a daughter. He scooped her up in his arms, spinning, her in the air and making her laugh. When he set her back down, he was smiling so widely his face hurt. She's going to be just like you, he said with conviction. Kind, compassionate, stronger than any billionaire I've ever met. We'll raise her to know that a person's value isn't in what they have, but in what they do for others. And what if she's like you? Clara asked. Stubborn, idealistic, willing to change the entire world because he learned it's the right thing to do? Then, we'll have our hands full, Alexander laughed. But I wouldn't change a thing. Clara kissed him, long and deep, right there in the parking lot of the hospital where a different version of their lives could have happened, where he could have left that hospital room 3 years ago, regained his memory, and gone back to being the cruel, empty man he was, where she could have continued working double shifts, eventually burning out, never finding someone who truly valued her. But that's not what happened. The accident, so terrible and traumatic, had also been a kind of rebirth. A few hours later, they were back at the mansion, which now seemed much less cold. Clara had brought life to the space, with plants in the windows, family photos on the walls, books scattered on the sofas. Alexander was in the office, but not working. He was writing. For the past few months, he had begun to document his journey, from the accident to the present, not to be published, but for his daughter, so that one day she could understand that people can change, that tragedies can turn into blessings, that love is worth more than any fortune. He wrote about the first time he saw Clara, about how her voice had been the only anchor in a sea of confusion. He wrote about the fear of discovering who he had been and the relief of finding out he didn't have to stay that person. He wrote about Richard and the betrayal, but also about how it had taught him that power without character is just well-dressed tyranny. He wrote about Maria and Miguel, about the cycle of kindness that kept expanding. And he wrote about Clara, always about Clara, the woman who had saved him without knowing she also needed to save herself. My dearest daughter, whom I have yet to meet, he wrote. One day you will ask how your mother and I met. I will tell you the truth. I was broken, lost, stripped of everything I thought defined me. And your mother was there, not because she had to be, but because kindness is part of who she is. She didn't know she was saving the man who would one day be your father. I didn't know I was learning how to be human again, but it happened. You will be born into a better world than the one I was born into. Not because the world has changed, but because I will make sure you have the tools to change it even more. I will teach you that wealth without purpose is just disguised poverty. I will teach you that power without compassion is weakness. And I will teach you, above all, that the greatest legacy we can leave is not companies or fortunes, but lives touched, people helped, cycles of kindness that continue long after we are gone. Your grandfather, whom I never knew because he died when I was young, left only money. I was determined to do the same. But then I lost everything, except what truly mattered. And I discovered that what mattered had been around me all along, waiting for me to be able to see it. I hope you never have to lose your memory to find your heart. I hope you grow up knowing that every person who crosses your path deserves dignity, that every action has consequences that ripple outward, and that true success isn't measured in dollars, but in lives improved. And if one day you get lost, if you feel the world has forced you to be someone you don't want to be, remember, your father was completely lost once, and a kind nurse with a genuine smile helped him find himself. Don't be afraid of getting lost. Be afraid of never looking for the way back. Clara entered the office quietly, seeing Alexander writing with tears in his eyes. Another letter for our daughter? He nodded. I want her to know the truth. All of it. The ugly, the beautiful, the transformative. She will, Clara said, sitting on the arm of his chair. Because she'll have you as a father. The man who chose to change, who chose to be better. I wasn't so much chosen as forced, he admitted. That accident took away my ability to keep being who I was. No, Clara shook her head. The accident took your memories. You chose who you would be without them. You could have fought to go back to being the old Alexander. You could have hired the best therapists to recover that ruthless mindset. But you didn't. You embraced the change. That was a choice. Alexander took her hand. The best choice I ever made, along with asking you to marry me, along with creating this foundation, along with everything that came after the day I woke up, and the first thing I saw was your face. They sat there in silence for a while, just existing in the same space, connected in a way that went beyond words. Outside, the city kept running. Companies kept making deals. People kept chasing money, power, status. But here, in this office that had once been a temple of cold ambition, there was only love. Love that had been born in the most unlikely way. Love that had survived amnesia, class divides, and sabotage attempts. Love that was now creating a new life, a new generation that would carry those lessons forward. 7 years later, a 6-year-old girl named Sophia ran through the corridors of the Maxwell Santos Community Hospital, her brown curls bouncing as she searched for her mother. "Mom! Mom! Where are you?" Clara appeared from one of the exam rooms, now the CEO of the entire network of medical centers that had spread to 12 cities. "Sophia, what have I told you about running in the hallways?" "Sorry." Sophia stopped immediately, trying to catch her breath. "But it's urgent. Miguel is back." Clara felt a smile form. "Miguel? The Miguel we met when you were a baby? The very same. He's downstairs with his mom, and he's wearing a white coat. He's a real doctor now." Clara ran down the hall too, forgetting her own rules about running. Down in the lobby, there was Miguel, now 13, no longer the thin 7-year-old. He was tall, healthy, and indeed wearing a white lab coat with a badge that read, "Young Scientists Program, Maxwell Santos Hospital." "Miguel!" Clara hugged him tightly. "Look at you." "Dr. Clara," he replied, hugging her back. "I told you I'd do it. Remember? I said I'd be a doctor when I grew up. And here you are. We are so proud." Maria, Miguel's mother, stood by with tears in her eyes. He was accepted into the hospital's medical mentorship program. He'll get to observe procedures, learn from the real doctors, maybe even choose a specialty. All thanks to you. At that moment, Alexander entered the building from an external meeting. Sophia saw him immediately and ran. "Daddy! Daddy! Miguel's back, and he's a doctor now." "Not quite a doctor yet, Princess," Alexander said, scooping her into his arms, "but well on his way. Miguel, it's great to see you." "Mr. Maxwell?" Miguel extended his hand formally, but Alexander ignored it and pulled him into a hug. "I told you to call." "Me, Alexander. And I am so proud of you. What do you want to specialize in?" "Oncology," Miguel said without hesitation. "I want to cure kids with cancer, like the doctors cured me. I want other families to have the same chance I did." "You'll have to study hard," Alexander said. "I know. I'm not afraid of hard work. My mom taught me that. And whenever I think about giving up, I remember that day you visited my hospital room. I remember the promise I made. I won't break it." Sophia, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. "Daddy, when I grow up, can I work at the hospital too?" "You can work wherever you want, Princess. But if you choose medicine, I'll be the happiest dad in the world." "I'm going to work here," Sophia declared, "because you and Mommy built this place to help people. And I want to help people too. I want to be like Mommy. Or like Miguel. Or like you, Daddy, when you make important decisions that make everyone happy." Alexander exchanged a look with Clara over Sophia's head. In that glance was everything. The gratitude for having found each other, the pride in the person their daughter was becoming, the satisfaction of knowing the cycle was perpetuating. "You know, Miguel," Alexander said, setting Sophia down. When I met you 7 years ago, I had just opened this hospital. I was nervous, wondering if it would really make a difference. If one person could change anything in such a big, complicated world. And then I met you. I saw your strength, your hope, your determination, and I knew that yes, one person can make a difference. You were one of those people for me. But you were the one who made the difference first, Miguel insisted. If you hadn't changed the company policies, if you hadn't covered my treatment, I wouldn't be here today. It was a cycle, Clara intervened softly. Alexander was lost. I helped him find himself. That inspired him to create these hospitals. You were helped here. That inspired Miguel to become a doctor. And one day, Miguel will help other people, who will inspire others. And the cycle continues. That's how we change the world. Not all at once, but one person at a time. Sophia looked up with her big, curious eyes. So I'm part of the cycle too? The most important part, Alexander said, picking her up again. Because you're the next generation. You're going to take everything we've learned, all our mistakes and successes, and do it even better. And maybe your daughter will do better than you, and her daughter better still. And one day, long after I'm gone, someone will look back and see that it all started in a hospital room, with a kind nurse and a CEO who had forgotten who he was. Are you going to die? Sophia asked with sudden concern. Everyone dies one day, Princess, Alexander said gently. But the good things we do, those live forever, in the people we help, in the lives we touch, in the cycles we start. So even when I'm not here anymore, a part of me will still be alive in you, in Miguel, in all the people this hospital has helped. Sophia thought about this for a moment, then nodded seriously. Then I'm going to do a lot of good things, to keep you alive for a long, long time. The innocence of the declaration made everyone laugh, but there was truth in it too. Legacies weren't about money or buildings with names on them. They were about values passed on, about kindness multiplied, about choices. That inspired more choices. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, Alexander and Clara stood on the mansion's balcony, looking at the stars. Remember that first day? Clara asked. When you woke up not knowing who you were? How could I forget? It was the day my life really began. You were so scared, so lost. And now look, you changed an entire company. You created a network of hospitals. You inspired people like Miguel. You raised an amazing daughter. Alexander shook his head. We did all that. I just provided the resources. You provided the vision, the compassion, the heart. Without you, I would have regained my memory and gone right back to being that empty, cruel man. But you didn't, Clara pointed out. Your memory never fully came back. But even if it did, I don't think you could go back to being that person. You've changed too deeply. Sometimes I'm afraid, Alexander admitted. Afraid that one day I'll wake up and all those memories will come, flooding back. And with them, that coldness, that ability to see people as resources instead of human beings. Afraid that I'll become the old Alexander again. Clara took his hand. If that happens, I'll be here, just like I was on that first day. And I'll remind you of who you chose to be, of the promises you made, of the daughter you're raising, of the man you became. You won't get lost as long as I'm by your side. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me. Alexander smiled. And you've said a lot of romantic things. It's the truth. We're a cycle too, you and I. You saved me by showing me that working to exhaustion wasn't a virtue, but an escape. I saved you by showing you that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but courage. We saved each other, and we keep doing it every day. They stayed out late, talking about plans for new hospitals, about Sophia's education, about Miguel and his journey to become a doctor. They talked about everything and nothing, the way only truly connected people can. Down in the city, Maxwell Industries continued to operate, now recognized worldwide not for being the most profitable, but the most ethical. Other companies had begun to copy its policies, realizing that treating employees like human beings was not only right, but profitable in the long run. The change was spreading. The cycle was expanding, and it had all started with a terrible accident, with amnesia, with a nurse who saw a frightened man instead of a powerful CEO. Sometimes happy endings are born from the most unlikely beginnings. Sometimes we need to get completely lost to truly find ourselves. And sometimes love finds us exactly when we stop looking for it. Alexander never fully recovered his memory. Fragments returned over the years, enough to understand his past, but never enough to emotionally reconnect with that person. And he was deeply grateful for it, because the old Alexander Maxwell was dead. In his place was a man who knew that the greatest wealth wasn't in bank accounts, but in a daughter's hugs, a wife's smile, and the gratitude of people whose lives were touched. A man who understood that real power didn't come from controlling others, but from empowering them to be better. A man who had learned, through the most traumatic loss, how to gain what truly mattered. And as the stars shone over the city, Alexander Maxwell held his wife's hand and knew with absolute certainty that the accident had been the best thing that ever happened to him, because it broke him out of the prison of who he had been and freed him to become who he was always meant to be. If this story moved you, if you believe people can change when they find true love, leave a heart down below. I want to hear from you. Have you ever gone through a profound transformation that completely changed who you are? Do you believe that sometimes we need to lose everything to gain what really matters? Tell your story in the comments. If this story touched your heart, leave a like if you believe that kindness creates cycles that never end. Subscribe so you don't miss our stories. Share with someone who needs to believe in second chances, in true transformation, and in the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Comment: I choose to be better today than I was yesterday. Remember, you don't need to lose your memory to find your heart. Sometimes, all it takes is looking at the IDD people around you and seeing what truly matters. See you in the next video with another story that will touch your soul.